My son-in-law told me he wanted to help me manage my family's farmhouse. He said it with a smile, like he was doing me a favor. He said, "A man my age shouldn't have to worry about all that property, all that land." He said, my daughter agreed. He said it was already decided. He didn't know that the man who had spent 40 years designing structures meant to outlast everyone in the room had just started drawing the most important blueprint of his life. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just nodded slowly and said I'd think about it. And I did think about it. Every single day for the next 3 weeks, while he assumed I was sitting in my rocking chair doing nothing, I was thinking about it very, very carefully. But before I tell you what I did, hit that like and subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The farmhouse had been in my family for 61 years. My father, a man named Gerald Holt, had bought those 85 acres with money he saved over a decade, working double shifts at a steel fabrication plant outside of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. He was a quiet man who didn't talk much, but when he walked the fence line of that property on Sunday mornings, he stood differently, taller. Like the ground beneath his feet was the one thing in the world that made complete sense to him. I grew up on that land. I learned to drive a tractor on it. I buried my dog under the old walnut tree at the back of the south field when I was 11 years old. I watched my mother grow a garden that took up half an acre every summer. I fell in love with my wife, Carol, at a bonfire on that property when we were both 23, and I carried her over the threshold of that farmhouse the summer after we got married. Carol died 4 years ago. Ovarian cancer, the kind that gives you 6 months from diagnosis to goodbye, and we spent every one of those months on that land, on that porch, in that house. She wanted to die somewhere she loved. She did. After she was gone, I stayed. Some people told me I should sell, move closer to my daughter, find a smaller place, something easier to maintain. I heard them out politely. Then I went back to the farmhouse and fixed the loose shutter on the second floor and replaced the rotted planks on the front porch and did not think about selling for even 1 second. I had retired from architecture 3 years before Carol's diagnosis. 40 years of designing courthouses, schools, and municipal buildings across Pennsylvania and New Jersey. My name was on the dedication plaques of 17 public structures. That meant nothing to my son-in-law, Derek Marsh. Derek was a residential real estate developer who talked about properties the way some men talked about cars, with appetite and no particular attachment. He had married my daughter, Stephanie, 8 years ago. She was 30 at the time, and in love in the way that makes a father hold his tongue when he has doubts. I had doubts. Derek was charming in the aggressive way of men who learned early that a good handshake and direct eye contact could get them most things they wanted. He called me Frank from the very first meeting, not Mr. Holt, not sir, just Frank, delivered with a familiarity he hadn't earned. I noticed. I said nothing. In the years that followed, I noticed other things too. I noticed the way Derek would ask, casually, at family dinners, about the assessed value of the farmhouse. I noticed the way he would steer conversations toward development in rural Pennsylvania, how land prices had tripled in the last decade, how smart money was getting out before the bubble. I noticed the way he looked at my property not like a place where a family had lived and worked and grieved and healed, but like an opportunity that hadn't been properly exploited yet. Stephanie was not a bad person. She was a good person in a complicated position. She had learned to smooth things over, to translate between Derek's bluntness and other people's feelings, to keep the peace at a cost to herself that I only fully understood later. She loved her husband. She also loved me and the farmhouse and what it represented. Those things should not have been in conflict. Derek made them so. The first real warning came on a Sunday afternoon, about 2 years after Carol died. Derek and Stephanie had driven up for the weekend, and the three of us were sitting on the porch after dinner when Derek leaned back in his chair and said, almost to himself, "You know, Frank, if you ever wanted to liquidate, this would be the time. Comparable parcels in this county are moving fast." I looked at him for a moment. "I'm not interested in liquidating," I said. He shrugged, just thinking out loud. "A man your age, living out here alone, managing all this, it's a lot." "I've managed it for 30 years, I said. I'll manage it for 30 more. He smiled. The conversation moved on, but I didn't forget it. The second warning came 6 months later when Derek mentioned, again casually, that he had a colleague who specialized in estate planning. Guy's brilliant, he said. Helps families avoid all the complications of probate. Might be worth a conversation, Frank, just to get things organized. For Stephanie's sake. For Stephanie's sake? It was the first time he used her as a lever. I thanked him for the suggestion and did not call his colleague. The third warning was not subtle at all. It was a Thursday morning, early October, the year before all of this came to a head. I was on a ladder replacing a section of the porch roof when my phone rang. It was Derek. Frank, I'm going to be direct with you, he said, which was always how he started sentences that were going to make my stomach tighten. I've had a conversation with a developer who's been buying up parcels in your township. He's very interested in your acreage. The number he's talking about is significant. Enough to set you up very comfortably for the rest of your life. Enough to give Stephanie real financial security. I stepped down from the ladder. I sat on the porch steps. I looked out at the fields my father had cleared with his own hands. Derek, I said, I appreciate you thinking of my financial comfort. The farmhouse is not for sale. A pause. The kind of pause that isn't thinking but performing. Look, I get the sentimental attachment. I really do. But sentiment isn't a retirement plan, Frank. You're 67 years old. This place needs constant work. What happens when you can't keep up with it? What happens when something goes wrong? I'll handle it, I said. You're not being realistic. I'm being very realistic. Realistic about what this land means and what it will continue to mean. My answer is no, Derek. Another pause. Shorter this time. I really think you should talk to Stephanie about this. I talk to my daughter all the time, I said. Have a good day, Derek. I climbed back up the ladder and finished the roof repair and tried to feel the same steady calm I always felt working with my hands on this house. But the truth was that the call had bothered me in a way I couldn't quite set aside. Not because of the money, not because of the developer, because Derek had said the quiet part out loud. He was already thinking of this land as something to negotiate, and he was already using my daughter as a bargaining chip. A few weeks later, Stephanie called. She sounded careful, the way she always did when Derek had briefed her first. Dad, Derek mentioned he spoke to you about the property. He did. I just want you to know that nothing is decided. He's just trying to think ahead. For all of us. Stephanie, I said gently, what do you want? A long, quiet moment. I want you to be okay. I want you to be safe and not alone and not burdened. I'm not burdened. I'm home. She didn't push further that day. But I heard something in her voice that concerned me more than Derek's sales pitch. I heard exhaustion. The actual confrontation came on a Saturday in February. They drove up unannounced, which was unusual. Derek came in like a man who had rehearsed the conversation and was confident in the outcome. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table my mother had made biscuits on every Sunday morning for 30 years, and he laid out what he called a plan. His developer contact was still interested. The number had gone up. Derek had already spoken with an estate attorney, not his colleague, but an actual attorney, about the process of transferring the property. He had a document, a preliminary agreement. He slid it across the table like we were closing a deal. All we need is your signature, Frank, he said. Just to get the process moving. Stephanie and I would handle everything from there. You wouldn't have to worry about any of it. I looked at the document. I looked at my daughter, who was standing near the window, not looking at either of us. Derek, I said, I have not agreed to sell this property. I know. But if you'll just look at the numbers. I've looked at the numbers. My answer has not changed. His jaw tightened. He leaned forward. Frank, with all due respect, you're not thinking clearly about this. You're letting emotion drive a financial decision that affects your entire family. Stephanie is your heir. This property is going to be hers eventually. All we're asking is that we start that process while you're here to participate in it. There it was again. This property is going to be hers eventually. The implication was direct this time. He was already past me in his own mind. I was not a person with authority over my own land. I was a temporary obstacle between him and an asset. I looked at Stephanie. Is this what you want? She finally turned from the window. Her eyes were wet. I just want things to stop being so tense, she said. I'm tired, Dad. I'm so tired. My heart broke for her in that moment. She was caught in a machine she hadn't built and couldn't stop. I understand, I said to her. Then I turned to Derek. I won't be signing anything today. I think you should both head home, and we can speak again when things are calmer. Derek stood up. He picked up his document. For a moment I thought he was going to say something ugly, but he swallowed it. He just looked at me with the flat, assessing stare of a man recalculating his approach. We'll talk soon, he said. They drove away. I stood at the kitchen window and watched the dust settle on the gravel road for a long time. I didn't feel angry. That was the strange thing. I felt something much colder and much more clarifying than anger. I felt the specific focus that comes when an architect finally understands exactly what a building needs to be. The design was forming. I just needed to draw it correctly. The next morning, I made a call I should have made a year earlier. I called a woman named Patricia Ellison. Pat was a trust and estates attorney in Harrisburg. I had worked with her on the legal structure of a community center I designed 8 years ago, a building meant to be donated to the city. She understood permanence. She understood how to build something that couldn't easily be undone. When I walked into her office 2 days later, I set a folder on her desk. Inside was the original deed to my property, my father's name written in the careful cursive of a county clerk from 1963. There was a survey map, a recent appraisal, and a handwritten list I had made the night before. The list had one item at the top that I had underlined twice. I want to make this property impossible to sell, I said. Pat looked at the deed. She looked at the appraisal. She looked at me. Tell me everything, she said. I told her about Derek, about the developer, about the document slid across my mother's kitchen table, about Stephanie's exhaustion, about my father standing taller when he walked the fence line, about Carol wanting to die somewhere she loved. Pat listened without interrupting. When I finished, she sat back and folded her hands. You're describing a situation that's unfortunately common, she said. An heir in waiting who's treating a living person's property as a future asset. The good news is that there are several very effective legal mechanisms available to you. The question is, what outcome you want. I want 2 things, I said. I want to make sure this land stays intact and is never subdivided or sold for development. And I want to make sure my daughter inherits something real, not something that Derek can immediately liquidate the moment the property transfers. Pat nodded slowly, a small, precise smile on her face. Mr. Holt, I think what you're describing is a conservation easement combined with a specially structured, irrevocable family trust with specific distribution and use restrictions. I leaned forward. Explain it to me, like I'm an architect reading a set of plans. She did. For 2 hours, we went through the legal architecture together, the load-bearing walls, and the structural columns of what we were building. A conservation easement would be placed on the land, entered into with a land trust organization, legally binding in perpetuity, prohibiting subdivision or development of the acreage. The easement would be filed with the county and the state. It would survive any future transfer of ownership. It could not be reversed by a new owner, by a spouse, by an heir, by anyone. It was a wall that would still be standing long after everyone in that room was gone. On top of that, the farmhouse and remaining property would be transferred into an irrevocable trust. The trust would name Stephanie as the primary beneficiary, which meant Derek couldn't claim she was being cut out. But the trust's terms would specify that the property could never be sold, mortgaged, or used as collateral during my lifetime, and could not be sold for development during Stephanie's lifetime. Any future transfer of the property would carry all existing restrictions. The farmhouse would remain a farmhouse. The fields would remain fields. I would remain as the sole trustee for life, with full authority over day-to-day decisions. There's one more thing, Pat said carefully. I want to flag that once this is executed, Stephanie's husband will have no legal pathway to what he's been pursuing. The reaction may be significant. I know, I said. Are you prepared for that? I thought about my father standing on that land, I thought about Carol's garden. I thought about the walnut tree. I've been prepared for it for 2 years, I said. I just didn't have the right blueprints. I spent the following 2 weeks doing what I had always done when I had a complex project in front of me. I worked methodically, and I worked quietly. I did not call Derek. I did not hint to Stephanie that anything was in motion. I went about my ordinary days, splitting wood in the mornings, checking the fence line in the afternoons, reading on the porch in the evenings. Derek called once during that period. His voice was careful, the tone of a man who had recalibrated after a setback. "Frank, I wanted to apologize for how our last conversation went," he said. "I pushed too hard. I think we all want the same thing here." "And what's that?" I asked. "Your well-being. The family's stability." "I appreciate that," I said. "Things are fine here. Getting some things organized on my end." "Oh?" A small note of alertness in his voice, like an antenna going up. "What kind of things?" "Just paperwork," I said. "The kind a man my age should have in order." A pause. "Well, if you need any help with that, Frank, my attorney is very—" "I have my own attorney," I said pleasantly. "Always have. You have a good night, Derek." I could feel his frustration through the phone before I ended the call. He thought he was the only one with a strategy. He had forgotten that the man he was trying to outmaneuver had spent 4 decades turning complex, competing interests into functional permanent structures. The day I sat in Pat's office to sign the final documents was a gray Tuesday in March. The easement agreement was already executed with the County Land Trust and filed the previous Friday. What remained was the trust instrument itself, 18 pages that had the quiet, solid weight of a well-engineered foundation. Pat walked me through the key provisions before I signed. She read them aloud with the careful deliberateness of someone who understood that words written in legal language became physical realities once they were executed. The farmhouse and all 85 acres were being transferred to the Gerald and Carol Holt Family Land Trust. The easement prohibited any subdivision, commercial development, or sale of the agricultural acreage in perpetuity. The farmhouse could not be sold, rented, or used for commercial purposes during my lifetime or Stephanie's lifetime. The trust required that the property be maintained as a working farm or natural land, actively managed and kept in good repair. Stephanie would inherit the right to live on the property and steward it, but not to sell it. Any future heir of Stephanie's would inherit the same rights under the same restrictions. There was one additional clause I had asked Pat to draft specifically. Any individual who had made documented attempts to coerce, pressure, or fraudulently induce the trust settler into transferring property prior to the creation of the trust would be barred from serving in any trustee or co-trustee capacity. I had given Pat the records, the emails Derek had sent, the text messages, the preliminary agreement he had slid across my mother's kitchen table. All of it was documented in an exhibit appended to the trust instrument. "This is thorough," Pat said when I handed her the file. "I'm an architect," I said. "I don't build things that fall down." I signed my name 11 times. Each time I pressed that pen to the paper, I felt something settle in me, the way a structure settles when the final beam goes into place and the whole thing exhales into its permanent form. "It's done," Pat said. "Filed with the county by end of day. The conservation easement has already been recorded. As of this moment, Frank, that land is protected for generations." I shook her hand. I drove home on back roads, watching the Pennsylvania countryside in early spring. The fields were still winter gray, but the tree lines had the faint copper blush that means something is coming. I pulled into my gravel drive and sat in the truck for a moment, looking at the farmhouse. The house my father built. The house where I had brought Carol home. The house I had repaired and maintained and refused to give up, not out of stubbornness, but out of the deep knowledge that some things are worth defending precisely because they cannot be replaced. He was going to come. I knew that, and I was ready. 3 weeks later, they came on a Sunday afternoon. Stephanie had called the Friday before, her voice carrying that particular brightness that meant she was performing calm. She said Derek had some exciting news about a new approach he wanted to share with me, and they'd be driving up Sunday if that was okay. I said that was fine. I said I'd make coffee. Derek pulled in first, his black truck gleaming and freshly washed. He got out in a good mood, the specific good mood of a man who believes he is about to win something. He had a leather portfolio under his arm. Stephanie got out of the passenger side, wearing the careful, composed expression of a woman bracing for the weather. I was on the porch. I had been on the porch for the better part of the morning, drinking coffee and watching a pair of red-tailed hawks work the thermals above the south field. I did not go down to greet them. I waited. "Frank," Derek came up the porch steps with a handshake and a wide smile. "Looking good. You get some sun out here this week? Nice out?" "It's been a good week," I said. Stephanie hugged me. I could feel the tension in her shoulders. We went inside. I poured the coffee. Derek set his portfolio on the kitchen table, my mother's table, the same surface where he had placed his preliminary agreement 2 months before. I noticed he'd waited until we were all seated before he opened it. "So, Frank," he started, "I've been doing a lot of thinking since our last conversation. I came on too strong. I want to acknowledge that. But I also want you to understand that everything I've been doing has been about protecting this family." I nodded. "I know you believe that. So I've had a new proposal drawn up. Something that gives you more control, more protection. Not a sale, more like a partnership." He opened the portfolio and slid a document across the table. "Basically, we'd form an LLC around the property. You'd remain a 50% member. Stephanie and I would hold the other 50. It gives us shared governance. It protects the asset from probate complications. And it gives you resources for maintenance without having to manage everything alone." I looked at the document. I looked at Derek. I looked at Stephanie, who was watching her coffee cup. "An LLC," I said. "It's a very clean structure," Derek said. "My attorney drafted this. It's simple. It's fair. It keeps everything in the family." "Stephanie," I said, "look at me." She looked up. "Is this what you want?" She held my gaze for a long moment. "I want things to work out, Dad." "That's not the same answer," I said, gently but clearly. She looked back down. I turned to Derek. "I appreciate the new approach," I said, "but I need to tell you something." I stood up and walked to the small writing desk in the corner of the living room, the desk my father had used to pay every household bill for 30 years, and I retrieved a manila envelope. I brought it back to the table and set it in the space between Derek's portfolio and my coffee cup. "About 3 weeks ago," I said, sitting back down, "I completed a legal process I had been planning for some time." I pushed the envelope toward him. "I'd encourage you to open that." Derek looked at the envelope. Something shifted in his expression, just slightly, a recalibration. He opened it. Inside were 2 documents, the recorded conservation easement and the executed trust instrument. He read the first page slowly, then he flipped through the next several. I watched his face change the way a landscape changes when a cloud moves in. Uncertainty, then comprehension, then the particular gray color of a man whose plan has just revealed itself to be useless. "What is this?" he said. It was not quite a question. "The farmhouse and all 85 acres have been transferred to an irrevocable family trust," I said. "The agricultural land is under a conservation easement filed with the county and the state. The easement prohibits subdivision, development, or sale of the farmland in perpetuity. The trust prohibits sale or commercial use of the property during my lifetime and Stephanie's lifetime. The land will pass to her with all restrictions intact." Derek's jaw was tight. "You can't just—" He stopped. He turned more pages. "This names Stephanie as beneficiary." "It does," I said. "This land will always be Stephanie's. It will also always be a farm. It will always be what my father bought it to be. Those 2 things are now permanently connected." Stephanie had gone very still. She was reading the documents now, leaning over Derek's shoulder. "Dad," she said quietly, "when did you do this?" 3 weeks ago," I said. "The planning started in February, after you both came up." Derek set the papers down on the table. He looked at me with the expression of a man who has just walked the full perimeter of a room and confirmed that there are no doors. "The LLC doesn't work now," he said. "No," I said. "It doesn't. You could have told us." His voice had gone flat. "You could have said something instead of letting me waste time on a proposal that—" You presented 3 separate plans to acquire control of this property, I said, keeping my voice level, over the course of 2 years. A referral to your estate attorney, a developer interested in the land, an LLC, structured to give you and Stephanie 50% governance, while I remained in nominal control. You slid a preliminary transfer agreement across this table without my agreement or prior discussion. At no point did I lead you to believe I was interested in any of these arrangements. At every point you proceeded anyway. I was trying to help. You were trying to position yourself to profit from land that belongs to my family, I said. Not loudly. Clearly. I am not angry about that, Derek. I understand the instinct. But I am not confused about what it was, and I was not going to allow it to succeed. The kitchen was quiet for a long moment. Through the window, I could see the south field and the old walnut tree at the back of it, bare in the March light. Derek picked up his portfolio and closed it. He stood. "Stephanie," he said, his voice clipped, "we should go." Stephanie did not move. "Stephanie." She looked up at me. Her eyes were full of something I hadn't seen in them for a long time. Clarity. "Go wait in the truck," she said to Derek. "I'll be out in a minute." Derek looked at her, then at me. He walked out. We heard the front door. We heard his footsteps on the porch. We heard the truck door. Stephanie sat at the kitchen table for a moment without speaking. Then she pressed her fingertips to her eyes and took a slow, careful breath. "I didn't know he was doing all of it," she said. "I knew he had the developer contact. I didn't know about the LLC until this week. I didn't know he had an attorney working on a transfer agreement." She lowered her hands. "I should have asked more questions." "You were trying to keep your family together," I said. "That's not a character flaw." "I let him use me," she said. "I let him use the fact that you love me as leverage against you. That's what I'm most ashamed of." I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. "Listen to me. Your mother used to say that the people who love us most are the easiest to exploit because they don't want to believe the exploitation is happening. That's not your fault. That's on the person doing it." She looked at the trust document still lying on the table. "You protected it. You protected everything." "I protected it for you," I said. "Not from you. There's a difference." She nodded. "I know." A pause. "I've been unhappy for a long time, Dad. I don't think I admitted that to myself until right now, sitting in this kitchen." I didn't say anything. I just held her hand. "I need to figure some things out," she said. "About my life. About what I actually want." She looked at me. "Can I come back here?" "Not right away, but sometime. When I need to think." "This will always be your home," I said. "That's the whole point." She hugged me at the door. The long, real kind of hug that means something has changed. Then she walked down the porch steps, across the gravel, and got into the truck. I stood on the porch and watched them drive away. The truck moved slowly down the gravel road, and I watched it until it turned onto the county road and disappeared behind the tree line. The dust settled. The hawks were still working the thermals over the south field. A woodpecker somewhere in the tree line was knocking out a steady rhythm against a dead elm. The property was quiet. It was the kind of quiet that has weight to it, that presses back gently against the silence inside you. I sat back down in my chair and looked out at the fields my father had bought with 10 years of doubled shifts and honest savings. I thought about how he used to walk the fence line on Sunday mornings. I understood it differently now than I had as a boy. He wasn't inspecting the property. He was communing with the permanence of it. He was reminding himself that he had made something that would outlast him, that the work of his life had taken a form that could be handed forward. That was what I had done. Not from anger, although there had been anger in the early stages, a cold and clarifying kind of anger. Not even from the satisfaction of outmaneuvering Derek, although I would be dishonest if I said the satisfaction wasn't present. I had done it because 40 years of building things taught me one lesson above all others. The structures that matter are the ones you design to last, not the ones you throw up quickly to solve an immediate problem. Not the ones you build for the person standing in front of you. The ones you build for the people who haven't arrived yet. My father built a farm. I maintained it. Now it would sustain itself beyond both of us, carrying inside its legal architecture the protection of a man who understood the difference between what can be bought and what must be built. Stephanie called 6 weeks later. Her voice was different, not performed, not careful, just her voice. She had asked Derek to move out of the house. She was speaking to a therapist. She was eating better and sleeping better, and had called her best friend from college for the first time in 3 years. She said that when Derek left, one of the first things she felt, under the grief and the fear, was relief. "I forgot what it felt like to just be myself," she said. "You have time to remember," I said. She drove up on a Saturday in May. I walked her around the full perimeter of the property, all 85 acres, the way my father used to walk it. I showed her the survey markers. I showed her where the creek ran along the eastern boundary. I showed her Carol's, garden plot, where the first tulips were already pushing up through the soil. I showed her the walnut tree at the back of the south field, still standing, still marking the place where a boy had said goodbye to a dog who had meant the world to him. We walked slowly. We didn't talk the whole time. When we came back to the house, she sat on the porch steps and looked out at the fields the way my father had, and I saw something in her posture that I recognized, a kind of settling into the ground beneath her feet. "Tell me more about how Grandpa bought this place," she said. I sat beside her, and I told her. I told her about the lumber mill, and the double shifts, and the deed written in careful courthouse cursive. I told her about the first summer, camping on the land before the house was built. I told her about the garden and the tractor and the walnut tree. I told her what her grandfather understood, and what I had spent most of my life learning to understand myself. That a man's legacy is not what he owns. It is what he refuses to let become something lesser. It is the line he draws and keeps. It is the structure he builds that says, "After I am gone, this place will remain what it was meant to be." We sat on those steps for a long time in the quiet May evening, and the land stretched out before us exactly as it always had, exactly as it always would. That is the whole truth of what I did and why I did it. I am not a dramatic man. I did not plan this as a revenge. I planned it as an architect plans anything worth building, with patience, with care, with the full understanding of what the structure needs to withstand. Derek wanted to profit from what my family built. Instead, he walked into a foundation so deep and so solid that there was simply nothing left for him to do except leave. The land is still here. The farmhouse is still standing. The south field still holds the light in the late afternoon the way it always has. And my daughter, for the first time in a long time, is standing in it like it belongs to her. Because it does. And it always will.